And welcome to a brand new week of Capital Talk, a program we hope will have an impact on the future of Kenya, now more than ever. I'm Jeff Koinange. Now, a brand new week means a brand new theme, and the theme all this week is the diplomats. That's why the bench is in Muthaiga, in U.S. territory to be precise, because the ambassador, 5 years later, is about to leave town, folks, but maybe just for a while. We'll let him explain what that means. But I tell you, when I first met this ambassador about 5 years ago, he had literally been in town weeks when a junior senator from Illinois came to town and made a speech that just rattled this government. That's right, he talked about two things which are still pertinent today: corruption and negative ethnicity. Well, that junior senator, you know the story. He's now president. But the ambassador, who had been only weeks in the country then, has been a busy man. Fast forward, 2007, the election. On election day, pretty smooth, pretty calm and quiet for the most part, until the counting began. And then, when the announcement that Mwai Kibaki was the official president, well, seemed to be an endorsement all the way from Washington. We'll find out whether that was true or not. Fast forward, next day, all hell broke loose. The ambassador has been literally hitting the ground since, busy trying to do what most people cannot do here: bring this country together. Talking about those 2 points that then Senator Obama, now the president, talked about: corruption, negative ethnicity. He's thrown in impunity in there, and that's what we want to talk about in this next half hour or so. Also, they didn't think of a guy by the name of Julian Assange. That's right, and the famous website that everybody knows about now, WikiLeaks. What's all that about? And so many other issues. Is the U.S. funding a youth group here in Kenya? What's the deal? And what happens next for the good ambassador? I know he loves the country. Does he also love someone in the country? Sit back, folks. It's Monday with outgoing U.S. Ambassador Michael RANNEBARGER.
Jeff, great to be with you.
Good
again.
to see you, Ambassador, as
Great
always.
to be with you. Yeah.
And I tell you, man, you've had a run the last 5 years.
It's been, I remember George W. Bush, the father, said, "Hell of a ride," after he left the presidency. I sort of feel like that. What a ride it's been. It's been great, and it's been wonderful.
And it's true, you had literally been here weeks.
Well, I've been here 10 days. 10 days. In fact, I used that to get my credentials presented very quickly. I said, whether you present them or not, I'm going to go around with Obama, so let me do it. But he came and he gave a very tough speech, and he wrote that speech himself and came to Kenya with it. Obviously asked for my opinion. I told him I thought it was accurate. But that speech really set a tone, for years to come. That if you read that speech today, Jeff, talking about negative ethnicity and corruption and pointing to the youth and saying it's up to you to change this country. Wow. I mean, that's as applicable today as it was then, isn't it? Even
unbelievable. 5 years later, Ambassador.
In a way, it's sad because 5 years later, those issues have not been dealt with. But we know that is Obama's view, and I've talked to him since then on a number of occasions, and I know he very much still feels that way.
Let's go back to that time in 06, Ambassador. Yeah. Did you know he was going to run? Yeah. Did you know? Because we kept asking him, everybody kept asking him, and he would avoid that question. Yeah. Did you know?
No, I didn't. But I do remember thinking, and I had just met him one time before. I called on him before I came out to Kenya. But I do remember thinking that this guy had a real charisma, that he was presidential. I do remember it distinctly. In fact, I was talking to my people afterwards, and I said, I think he'll run. I think he's presidential. And of course, I don't know if you know this, but the whole family was there.
Yes.
Michelle Obama, their kids. I mean, everybody was there. Auma was there, the sister. Right. And again, the whole family just kind of exuded that kind of aura. Yeah. So and I was very impressed by him. He is one sharp individual. He listens. He quickly sort of summarizes the information, uses it. Very, very sharp guy.
Yeah. Let's fast forward. Yeah. December 2007. Yeah. It looked like it was going to be a great election, Ambassador. I mean, election day, peaceful for the most part, huge turnout, and everything seemed all rosy.
Yeah. I went to Canberra at about 6:30 in the morning, Langata in Canberra, and watched some voting at a school there. It was inspiring. It almost brought tears to your eyes. There were young people, almost all young people, lining up. I think it was like 2 miles long or something. It was incredible. Everybody was orderly, patient. All the procedures were being followed. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a great election. And then, of course, the vote count started. Everything still seemed pretty good. And then midway through, we all know what happened. And it was a devastating moment. It was probably my lowest moment in Kenya in many ways, because I was disappointed.
Absolutely, and so were a lot of people. When the announcement was made, Mwai Kibaki, president, there was a message. I mean, one of the first messages after I think Uganda, or one of the first countries was Uganda, and then State Department said, hey, we endorse this winner. And then the next day or whenever, it was withdrawn, rescinded.
What actually happened was this. You may remember when the vote count was finished and the Electoral Commission certified President Kibaki as the winner, I said on the steps of the KICC, look, President Kibaki has been declared the winner by the constitutional authority of the country, the court, but the election had a cloud over it. It was tainted. There needs to be a political solution to this crisis. And almost simultaneously, somebody from one of the wire services called the State Department at about 1 in the morning and got the duty officer for public affairs and said, what do you think about the election of President Kibaki? And this very junior officer said, we congratulate the president and all that. But we never did. Because, as I say, we accepted it as the legal result because of the Electoral Commission, but we certainly didn't think it was a good election, and so we clarified that quite quickly.
Yeah. Did you know what would happen next, Ambassador? Because people say the U.S. knows everything. You've got an eye in the sky everywhere. Did you know?
No. I of course I wish we did. We don't. But what I did understand, of course, and we had obviously a lot of feelers out in the country, is there was going to be a lot of trouble. I mean, that was clear. You had violence starting almost immediately, some of it spontaneous, but a lot of it organized, and so that did not bode well. So what I fully expected, just in those initial hours, was that this would deteriorate into a major crisis that could paralyze and cause chaos in the whole country potentially. And again, that's why very early on, and obviously I consulted with Washington, but it was my approach that they accepted, was to call for a political solution. I thought we had to make clear very early on that we wanted to see this resolved, not that simply the president won, end of story, because that would have then led to, I think, even greater violence.
Absolutely. And you worked hard. I mean, you brought in the big guns. I remember then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice also came to town. I mean, things must have been really ugly for you guys, for you to bring such a high-level person.
She came to town, Jeff, and I wish, I don't know if I can talk about it yet, but boy, what meetings she had. She came for one day. And she said to me, Ambassador, what do I need to do? And I had known her for years, and I said, Madam Secretary, the country's in flames. Both sides have diametrically opposed points of view. There's no effort to really bridge the gap. So you've really got to shake them up. You got to shake them up big time. And
she shook them up.
Oh my God! So we went in and we met with the president's team, the president and his team, and they basically said, look, hey, it's happened. I mean, the Constitution's the Constitution. If, they can go to the courts or whatever. And the secretary said, that's just unacceptable. We have to have a political solution here. And then she met with Odinga, and of course he was saying, all sorts of things, and she said, nope. She said there's going to be a political solution. That's it. And so I mean, we with both sides we took an equally firm view that you couldn't. It wasn't practical. You couldn't have a new election, not given in those conditions. The ballots had been adulterated. A recount wasn't practical either. So what other choice was there? There wasn't another choice.
I can't wait for your memoirs because there's some I can sense there's some missing minutes somewhere. She must have told the line or else.
Well, I can't go to the whole meeting, but I'll tell you, the meeting we had with the president and his people was about 2 hours. That gives you a sense of it. And the meeting with Odinga was over an hour. So it was tough stuff.
Wow. February 28th, 2008, when the two sides finally came together and signed that national accord. Was that a great moment? I mean, because 3 months of madness.
It was a good moment. I want to say great. I mean, it's a shame that it came to that, obviously. It would have been great to have a good election. That would have been a great outcome. It was a good moment, though. I really felt, and there's some people who disagree with me to this day, but I truly felt there was no other alternative. And by getting that national accord, which we did play a role in, going between the two sides, helping the negotiations, working very closely. By the way, I just want to throw this in with Kofi Annan, who I have the enormous respect for. I mean, he deserves lion's share of credit. We helped push for the political solution. He negotiated, as you know. But we did a lot behind the scenes. But I thought that was a good moment for the country because it stopped the bloodshed. I mean, that violence and bloodshed, Jeff, it could have gone on for months. You know, with the tensions as high as they were, with the organization and number of weapons and money being passed around, it could have gone on for a long time. It could have expanded. It could have taken this country over the brink.
And then you were caught in the middle, Ambassador, because PNU was blaming you for being pro-ODM. ODM was blaming you for being pro-PNU.
Exactly.
You were the man in the middle.
But of course now everybody realizes I wasn't pro either side. But it took a while for them to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
But we weren't. We weren't pro either side, obviously, and we never have been. That was always a misconception.
Yeah.
You know, people somehow want to believe something and they put it in their mind.
Did you think, Ambassador, that someone would come up with a list, or some people would be held accountable for what happened in those 3 months of madness?
Yeah, well, I knew that that there had been a decision to come up with a list of the top level suspects, so to speak. I never saw that list, and as far as I know, Kofi Annan never saw it. I mean, this was something that was truly done by the WACA Commission on its own. To this day, I don't think any accurate list has ever come out. I mean, there are various versions of it that people claim to have. Yeah. I don't think the real versions ever come out. But remember, Jeff, we were the one country calling strongly for a local tribunal. You remember we said there should be a local tribunal. Well, ironically, some of the same people who are now suspects opposed it. The political class generally opposed it. And so there wasn't, and then Annan carried the ball and he said, if you don't do it, I'm going to give this envelope to the ICC because we have to have accountability. So it's gone to the ICC, and our view now is that has to move ahead to conclusion.
And those 6 names, Ambassador, those 6 names, are those the right names, do you think, in your opinion?
Yeah. You know, I don't want, Jeff, you know, I don't want to speculate. I really don't. I'm being very careful on this one because I truly believe, fundamentally, people are innocent until proven guilty. It's just no question. It has to be that way. It has to be, anybody could be accused of anything. Whether they're the right names or not, I think it's for the Kenyan people to judge. I mean, the Kenyan people know what happened. They have a general sense of this. They support the ICC process. We'll let the ICC decide because, I mean, it's possible these people will be exonerated. It's possible they'll be found guilty of something. Who knows? Yeah. And I don't want to try to say anything that could in any way affect that ICC process or accuse us of being, because we're not. We're that's our position, very simply.
You don't think there's anyone missing from the list?
Oh, you know, a list can always be bigger. I mean, depending on what you hear there were either 10 or 14 people on the WACI list. I don't know. So I'm sure there are plenty of other people who could be on that list. But, you know, my understanding is that Ocampo went through that list and took what he thought were the ones who made the best cases and were perhaps the most egregious cases. But I don't, again, he hasn't shared how he came to that list with me, I don't think we should speculate.
And the bottom line is, what you just said, you pushed. A lot of people pushed for a local special tribunal.
Push for a local tribunal. And now, though, it really is too late for that. I mean, you know, the ICC horse has left the barn. We need to let that process run. That's our strong view. We need to let that process run. I mean, there still needs to be a local mechanism, tribunal, whatever you want to call it, to deal with all the other perpetrators. Because obviously there were hundreds, thousands of people who hurt people and burned houses, committed rape, all this kind of thing. They need to be held accountable too.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, you think this list or these folks going to The Hague has sent that message to people out there that gone are the days of impunity?
Well, I think it has the possibility to do that. I think it sobered people. When you watch senior Kenyan politicians and ministers stand in front of a judge, giving their sort of name and date of birth and all that.
And not just any judge.
Not just any judge. And it wasn't any honorable this or honorable that. It was just their name, period. So I think that in itself is a good sign. You know, in fact, no minister, no assistant minister, no permanent secretary in this country has ever really gone before a credible tribunal before. Yeah, some have appeared before local tribunals here, but they're not very credible processes. So, you know, I think just the process is positive about impunity. I mean, let's say people are exonerated, fine, but a point is made that cases will be investigated and the perpetrators will be held accountable. I mean, you know, and it's very possible, perhaps they're truly innocent. I don't know, you know, I haven't seen the evidence.
Yeah. Coming back to the Grand Coalition, Ambassador, it really hasn't worked, has it?
Yeah, very good. I wouldn't say that entirely. Here's what I would say about the Grand Coalition. It was the only alternative at the time, okay? The Constitution has encapsulated that and said it runs until 2012, right? It has provided one thing to this country, and that is stability, more or less. I mean, we haven't seen a resurgence of violence. We have seen stability. It has given both sides some degree of governing power. It has not worked nearly the way it should have. They're not cooperating among themselves. In fact, the behavior is sometimes quite disgraceful. I mean, you don't see ministers doing what they should. A lot of times ministers aren't responsive to the prime minister the way they should be. I think the president, you know what again is sort of sad about this, in a way, I guess, or tragic, the prime minister and the president left on their own, I'm convinced, would run this government just fine. But they're surrounded by all sorts of people, many of them not well-intentioned, or to be honest, sometimes not that competent. And so they'll have a meeting one-on-one, and they'll leave the meeting, and there's no follow-up, or things don't get done. So I think left on their own, if they could be locked away somewhere, But I remember during the crisis, in fact, Jeff, flashback to the crisis. I was meeting frequently with the president one-on-one, and I was meeting with Ryla one-on-one. And we had very, very constructive exchanges, I mean, individually. And several times, the two of them asked me to pass messages back and forth and this sort of thing, which I did, and one-on-one, and there was follow-up. But I think what happened there, the crisis was so intense, and the principals, after a certain period, they became truly engaged. But I actually saw them work directly with each other to ultimately bring about the negotiated solution. But it just hasn't happened since. I think what happened since, of course, is over the past couple of years, politics intrude more. Everybody's got their eye, and have had for some time, on 2012. Yeah. And so, that's a big factor.
Well, the other good thing they've done together, at least, is they both were on the same camp when it had to do with the new Constitution, at least.
That's a big one. That's a big one. I'm very pleased that President Obama spoke out early on that in June. He gave a very clear statement. And then, of course, I went around the country campaigning, promoting civic education for the Constitution.
Same thing.
Promoting civic education for the Constitution. In fact, a couple times I literally, it was actually funny, Jeff, I almost ran into one of the leading no campaigners on the road. I mean, it's sort of black cars passing me. I'm coming from a function addressing religious leaders up in Kesey. Right. And literally, he's going to follow me to the same function to turn around what I did. He didn't succeed. But I turned around that vote in Kesey, and also we turned it around down in Taita Deveta and
I remember that story. Is he on the list? But that was the moment. I guess if there's anything to get this grand coalition, it's the Constitution. However, we have missed so many windows, Ambassador. It makes no sense. We're either dropping the ball or we're missing windows of opportunity.
Well, now look, the Constitution gets passed, right? Everybody's excited. It was sort of like, in a way, the 2002 election. Everybody's excited, reform and all that, and then things fade. Now, here's the danger, and I've said this, and I truly believe this. Right now, it's as if Kenya is caught amidst the forces of the status quo, which is most of the political establishment. I'm not saying there aren't politicians who want reform. There are. And there are some good people there. But I'm talking about the critical mass, wants the status quo, more or less. And the forces of reform and change, which I think is about 95% of the Kenyan people. And the only question in my mind is, will the forces of change prevail by 2012 enough to create a positive atmosphere then? Or will the forces of the status quo sort of hang on? But there's no doubt in my mind that there's a fundamental transformation going on in this country. So there will be fundamental change. The only question is, will it come in time? And it's kind of a race against the clock for 2012. And when we look at the Constitution, Jeff, look at the delayed implementation schedule. I mean, Nachai has spoken out. Lots of people are expressing concern. There are bills that should have been passed. They're wrangling over who's going to head the Legal and Justice Affairs Committee. They're worried about the appointments. They need to get on with the work of the government, which is passing these bills. Yeah. There are so many priority areas, Jeff. Judicial reform, police reform, electoral reform, putting in place the devolution system. They've got to get with it. It's barely a year to the elections.
Good point, Ambassador. Good point. I want to talk more about that, and also the fundamental change that you're talking about. I know the U.S. is funding a youth group, or youth groups in general. There's a kitty somewhere. There's some cash available. Can I have some of that? Also, WikiLeaks. Yes. Who would have thought? Yeah. And also, the love of your life. You're blushing, man. You're blushing. Let's take a break.
I'm sunburned, Joe. Not blushing.
It's only Monday, folks. Good grief. The ambassador is speaking out. in his own backyard. I tell you, he's holding nothing back. That's because he has nothing to hide. He's had a great 5-year run. It's coming to an end, folks, but do not rule this man out. Something tells me he will be back, and you stay tuned because the bench will be back from Mathaiga, and we have a surprise guest coming up. Back in a moment. And welcome back to Capital Talk. We're coming to you straight from U.S. territory right here in Mathaiga. All week long, it's all about the diplomats, beginning, that's right, with my friend, I can say this, with our fear of favor. He's been here 5 years. He's done, depending on who you ask, he's done a pretty decent job, folks. And now he's about to leave town, but maybe not for too long. We're talking about everything with Ambassador Michael RANNEBARGER. It's time for WikiLeaks.
Jeff,
Ambassador.
I have to take issue there. Decent job? I mean, you couldn't come up with anything, okay, good, great, whatever.
I'm trying to be modest here.
Okay, Jeff. Okay.
WikiLeaks, Ambassador.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Julian Assange just comes out and this thing just, it's a thorn in the side. You got to admit.
Well, it's been a blockbuster. And, I said to people, in a way, quite seriously, it's like walking out of your door, front door, naked, everybody. People are seeing your innermost thoughts. Now, let me just say for the record, and I say, we're not supposed to comment on WikiLeaks. So for the record, and quite honestly, not all of those alleged cables are accurate. I mean, not in all senses. So, I'm not going to get into the details of what's been published. But what I will say is this. The reaction I've gotten from the Kenyan people has been amazingly positive. People come up to me on the street and say, Ambassador, thank God you know what's going on in this country, We've known, but thank God we now know that you know. And it's also showed, I think, how objective we have been about things, not pro-Kibaki, not pro-Dinga. So I think in that way, it hasn't necessarily had an adverse impact here. And I still have dialogues with all the political figures, including those who are mentioned inside the WikiLeaks.
Including the vice president, who apparently said that, the president was kind of sickly.
Including vice president. Yeah, he got in a little trouble for that. But one of the more amusing things is sometimes I'll pick up the paper and I'll read one of those and I'll think, wow. Now here is, you name the politician, and he's reading about this other guy and what he said about him, and he's thinking, that so-and-so said that about me, So what it's causing in the middle of them is just fascinating. Yeah. But I think it's helped to open, one Kenyan said to me that he thought it had almost a transformative impact. Now that might be a little strong, but I think it's had a pretty big impact. And in a way, that's not true around the world, of course. There are many places in the world, and people who leak that kind of information, of course, are criminal. I mean, the person in the U.S. government who leaked that is a criminal. I mean, he's being tried for very serious crime.
Yeah. Are we expecting more? Because I'm sure what's been leaked is just a tiny percentage.
I think there are. I don't honestly know what's left, but I'm sure there are probably other cables. I don't know. They've got a whole cache of them.
Is there anything you would like to tell us now that you said that we'll find out later?
Well, no, I'm not going to predict. I don't even know what's out there. Maybe I'll be out of the country before they come out. It'll be sort of like I'm my half-life after I leave, as the cables come out.
Yeah, we'll be saying, he said what?
Exactly. No, absolutely.
All right. The fact that the U.S. is apparently funding a youth group here has gotten some politicians pretty rattled.
It really has. I'll tell you what I think is one of the stories that really reveals the whole view of the political class about this. You were talking about the coalition government. So back in, I think it was November of 2009. Now, Jeff, that's almost 2 years ago, before I even announced the Yes Youth Can program. But I was going around the country holding town hall meetings with young people, because it's important to have dialogue, and I wasn't doing anything wrong, So I get called up to a meeting with 6 ministers of the coalition government, 3 ODM, 3 PNU, very senior people, top levels.
Names?
Well, the very top, And so I'm sitting there with them, and you know how they're not unified on anything. On this, they were unified like this, man. They were 100% unified. And I said, well, what do you want to talk about? I didn't even know. Yeah. And they said, well, we want to talk about all this stuff you're doing with these young people. I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, you're going around the country, you're meeting with young people, you're stirring things up. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, it's a free country. Your ambassador can go around the U.S. and meet with youth groups if he wants. I'm urging peaceful participation in the democratic process. What's wrong with that? Make a long story short, the conversation was a very tough conversation, about an hour and a half. And I finally said to them, look, here's why you don't like this. because if we empower the young people, it will make them less susceptible to your manipulation in 2012. Let's call a spade here. And finally, one of them got so angry, he jumped up and he pointed his finger at me and he said, "If you keep this up, you're going to destabilize the whole system." By which, Jeff, he didn't mean the democratic system. He meant the whole system of, the way it works, manipulation, whatever.
Who's next and,
exactly. And that was a eureka moment. So I went back and held a meeting with my staff and I said, we've got to redouble these efforts and we're onto something here. And that did, in fact, lead to the Yes Youth Can program. We then fashioned this program. And by the way, all of this was in consult with Washington. Very interestingly, and I can tell you this, after that meeting, that's not every day you get called up and reamed out by 6 ministers, So I decided maybe I'd tell Washington about that, So I sent back and I said, hey, this has happened. I'm doing these things with youth. I plan to continue it. Let me know if you have any problem, And they sent back a message in writing which said, absolutely not, full steam ahead. You do exactly what you're doing. That is our policy. That is our approach. So people don't realize this, Jeff. I can't tell you how many times people say, oh, this is RANNEBARGER doing this stuff, or he's making this up. No, these are policies of my government. Obama believes very strongly in youth empowerment. He held an African Youth Leaders Summit last year, for heaven's sake. He mentioned Yes Youth Can. So we're going to continue this empowerment program. It's about, I think it's $45 million. I think that's 3.5 billion shillings or something, billion Kenya shillings.
And what does it do exactly?
Well, it's two things. One, it empowers young people economically by helping them to set up micro enterprises, generate employment, and this sort of thing. But two, very importantly, it helps them organize as groups to participate in the political process. Not as ODM, not as PNU, strictly nonpartisan, but to participate. In other words, hold MPs accountable, hold town hall meetings, get people to register, peaceful participation in the process.
Is that why President Obama hasn't come, isn't bothering to come? We don't see any light at the end of this tunnel because, we have, when he visits his country or the country of his father's birth, one would think, this would have been one of the places.
He went to Ghana, as you know, and bypassed Kenya. And sometimes I think a cartoon says it all. You don't even have to do it. And it really did. Literally, it captured the words right out of my mouth at the time, which is there was a picture of Air Force One flying over Kenya. And there was a little note floating down and a little picture of Kibaki and Odinga looking up at it. And the note said, "Get your act together, signed Barack Obama." And that was the message, literally. Yeah. That was the message of bypassing Kenya. Now, since then, the new Constitution has been passed. That is a major milestone. The president asked that, clearly supported that, President Obama. The coalition government, as you said, in a rare show of unity, pushed that. They deserve enormous credit for that, the president and the prime minister. As a result, that does create, I think, a different context. Now, impunity has not been dealt with, negative ethnicity, but those are issues that we will continue to push on. So I think at some point, President Obama will visit. I really don't know when. I can't say. I don't know.
You going to come with him? Give him the tour like you did in 06?
I don't know about that. Normally, the way it works for us, once you leave, you really don't get re-involved in the country on an official basis, unless it can happen, but not certainly immediately. I'll give space for my predecessor. I respect that. I mean, look, you've got to give space to the new guy to do his thing. I mean, he'll be competent. He'll do his own thing. Yeah. He'll do it his way. I hope the Kenyan people will give him the same kind of support and extend the same kind of friendship that they've extended to me.
Yeah, what's he like? Scott Gratian, right?
He's a good man. He's a retired military guy. He grew up in Kenya. Part of his young life was spent in Kenya. Child of missionary parents. Speaks I think Swahili very well. So I think he'll do a good job here. Yeah. I'm not a close personal friend of his, but I know him obviously, and I've been briefing him.
What does Ambassador RANNEBARGER do next?
Well, I'm going to be going back to Washington. I've got a couple things in the works, Jeff. I can't say exactly, but I think good things will happen, and then we'll see what my future holds, and even in terms of Kenya at some point. But as I say, initially, you've got to give your successor and the space to operate.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why you're coming back is the love of your life.
Well, I've developed a certain attachment. Absolutely.
There you go. But you're blushing again.
Well, I don't know about that. Jeff.
Before we bring her on,
I think I'm sunburned. I've just been playing tennis this morning.
Before we bring her on, two things: highest moment, lowest moment in Kenya.
Well, I think the lowest moment was truly was sort of as the election of 2007 went south. During those hours, really, and day or two when the vote count was being manipulated and all that. Because I felt, I really, I had some extraordinary moment here. One of my people who had been chief of my elections team, she came to my residence. I was getting a briefing, and she broke down in tears. Because she was very good. She'd been here for many years. We really thought we had everything covered. Jeff, we had a massive election program. We had over 200 observers deployed just from the U.S. government. We had all sorts of safeguards. We covered everything. And as I said, we covered everything except the people in the basement. There's always an angle you don't think of. And so and really, even the opposition was not, and I met with them even a week before the elections, no one was really predicting that kind of a thing. I mean, there's always been trouble with Kenyan elections. You always expect something. So when it happened, and when it was so egregious, it was definitely a low moment. High moment, so many, meeting overall, the interactions I've had with the Kenyan people, I mean, seriously, have been high moments, just thousands of them. But probably high moment, I believe, and again, I know there are people who might not agree. I think that that saying there needed to be a political solution and kind of defining in that way the whole framework for what came later. I think that was positive. I do think it avoided bloodshed that would have happened, more bloodshed and violence. And the other high moment, of course, when the Constitution was passed and the role that we played in that. Yeah. And I got a hell of a compliment from a certain politician on that, Jeff.
Is he on the list?
He said 4 people had brought you the Constitution, the President, Odinga, Annan, and RANNEBARGER. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good stuff, I think that's an exaggeration, but I thought, what the heck, You don't get compliments like that every day.
You're enshrined in... Are we out of the woods just yet?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you, I am positive. What I've said is this. It's like I said, I think there's sort of a race against time for 2012. And it's disconcerting that there have been so many delays in implementation. And I think the fact that very little progress has been made on reconciliation is very dangerous. But I have a lot of I'm not a Pollyanna, but I have a lot of faith in the Kenyan people. I really do. People are smart. They've got a lot of common sense, and they don't want a repeat of what happened in 2008. A lot of people have learned a lot. Youth empowerment's proceeding. That's going to change things. I think there'll be a lot of surprises in 2012. Not necessarily that there'll be some brand new candidates. That's possible. Look at Obama. 2 years, he did it. Yep. But even if the same elite are running, I think they're going to have a tougher time of it. More questions being asked, more accountability being insisted upon.
And that's the same way we're saying arrest the drug lords, and you've been saying this for a long time, arrest the drug lords, because we all know who they are. We know who they are. And yet no one's doing a thing about it.
In this country, that movie Casablanca.
Oh, yeah.
There's that great line when something happens and Claude Rains, the Vichy police guy, says, arrest the usual suspects. Here, it's sort of like set up the usual commission. And, that's a way of diverting attention. You do a perfunctory investigation or whatever. But I'll tell you, we've brought in the Drug Enforcement Administration. We're not fooling around on this one. We're not fooling around at all.
The DEA's here?
DEA's here.
Will they make arrests, or will they just recommend?
Well, they won't make arrests here because they don't have arrest authority in Kenya, but they can work with the Kenyan authorities. And if we can trace cases to the U.S., obviously that could give us a basis for warrants and this sort of thing. But that's all in the works. But as I was pointing out to people, it can take months, if not years, to build a drug enforcement case. These are very complex issues. But just so the Kenyan people know, that wasn't a one-off, showboat type thing. We're serious about getting to the bottom of that, because if not, drug trafficking alone will destabilize this country. And it's part and parcel of corruption. And, Kenyan people say to me, well, when do we know that we're making progress on, I was saying, Jeff, if you talk to the Kenyan politicians, whoever they are, you could talk to them 4 or 5 hours. They're good. You'll walk out of that meeting and you'll think, wow, these people are visionary, reformer type people, good. But of course, nothing happens. So we'll know when there's progress against corruption and impunity when a minister goes to jail, not just to court, but to jail, for hate speech, for impunity, for violence, for whatever. Then we'll know there's progress in this country. But until then, there won't be progress on those issues.
Good point. Good point. I know another one of your major highlights in Kenya was meeting Ruth Conchella.
Well, it was a seminal moment.
It is time to bring Ruth Conchella
All right.
to the bench.
All right.
First time ever
Let's do it.
on Kenyan TV.
Jeff, is this a scoop for you?
Huge.
You owe me big time.
You know I do. So, how did you all meet?
Well, we met.
Maybe I should ask Ruth.
No, let me tell it. I tell it better than she does.
Okay.
We met. I had only been in the country for about, I guess it was a month or so. It was quite remarkable. But first, I got to tell you a story. There's a village in Transmara called Innocen. It's very famous because Innocen, after 9/11, the terrorist attacks, they gave 14 cows to the people of New York. It was written up in the New York Times and all sorts of things. And of course, we couldn't physically accept the cows, but they agreed to keep the cows in perpetuity for the people of America. And there's actually a brand on them. There's a whole. It's now 35. The herd's developed and all that. And so I'd thought that for the 5th anniversary of 9/11, which was 2006, it would be a nice gesture that I go to the village of Innocen and offer 14 scholarships in return for the cows.
Okay.
So I go to Innocen, first trip out of Nairobi, to deliver these scholarships. And so I go. There's a whole program set up with the community and everything, and I do the whole program. And I'm there with my daughter, and I'm in a hurry. I'm always in a hurry, you know what the hell. So I do the program, and we're starting to get up out of our chairs, the elders, and I hear this singing in the distance. We were in a big field. The singing in the distance at the end of the field, and I thought, what's that? And the elder said, oh, it's some women down there. Let's go. The program's over. And I said, no, I want to hear what they have to say. And Ruth comes up with a group of Maasai women in traditional dress, kind of dancing their way up to the podium, and they present me with a petition on women's issues and what's going on in the region. And I accepted it, and that was it. No discussion or anything. And then I left and went away. But I had been so impressed, and I've always felt strongly for a long time about women's empowerment. I mean, it is important. It's been, by the way, it's been an important part of what I've tried to do in Kenya as well. And so I was struck by that. I thought, yeah, that's the kind of assertive, woman. I mean, a person trying to empower themselves that I like, And then, that kind of got her on our list of, people I invite to reception, civil society, that kind of thing. But it actually. Well, maybe Ruth said, but I mean, it took quite a long time before, anything developed, so to speak.
So it wasn't love at first sight? Ruth, it wasn't love at first sight?
I think I liked him when I saw him the first time.
Did you?
Yeah. And then, surprisingly, the following day when I got back to Nairobi, I bought a magazine which had a nice picture of him with Obama. And I looked at this man, he looked really nice. But
notwithstanding
nothing happened after.
It really was quite a long time before things developed. But
clearly, I saw you one time. I think it was at Jenga Karume's son's wedding, one of those functions.
Yes.
And you both showed up together.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No.
Boom,
no,
just like that.
Yeah. No.
And that was it. From then, you weren't hiding this stuff.
We won't say what day. We weren't even hiding it. It really hasn't been all that long, So I mean, anyway, it's something that developed, but developed quickly. When it started to develop, it developed quickly. But there was that, if you will say, kinship or friendship that went back, but it wasn't like instantly something happened, Which some ways that's also kind of a good way for things to be,
Yeah, Ruth.
Yeah.
The big question. Has he popped the big question? Are you going to get married?
At some point, yeah, we will definitely.
You're blushing.
No, go ahead.
Go on.
I like him very much. At some point, we're going to get married.
Soon?
Yeah.
This year?
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Are you married yet? I mean, maybe
No. There's been a lot of rumors about dowry and all that kind of thing. Nothing has happened. No, not at all. Not at all.
But you guys are going to do this, right?
Well, I'm sure we will. At some point. We just don't have a.
Yeah. Which means he's going to come back. He's going to have to come back. You cannot move to America.
Yeah, he'll obviously come here and meet his family. The people from Kigoris.
Have they given you a Maasai name?
I do have one, not really connected to her. It's Olimonyak, which means like the lucky one or the blessed one. How about that? It's pretty good. That's not bad. But I guess to sum it up, I thought Ruth last night, the reception sort of stole my thunder a little bit, Jeff. I mean, she spoke before I did. And by the time they got to my speech, everybody was so buzzing about her talk. Nobody was listening to me.
Yeah.
and she kind of stole what I expect to be the headline in every paper tomorrow, which is, he discovered Africa, I discovered first world love. It's not bad.
Great line. Great line. What's the best thing?
Line.
What's the best thing about him, Ruth?
Michael has been my mentor and a good advisor. If there's one person who is positive, it's him. Even when everybody else thinks it's impossible, he always sees the light at the end of the tunnel. He's been such an inspiration to me, and he's so loving also.
Michael, the lover,
Well,
and the mentor.
yeah. No, and Ruth is also a very positive person, and we match quite well that way. She's really a very positive person, and actually has a lot of background in counseling, and is somebody that you always has a great insight into issues that are pending. So in many ways, she's given good counsel to me.
Yeah. Well, you guys do make a good couple.
Yeah.
I must say that.
I said, Jeff, gosh, fate smiles on you, doesn't it? Because now think about this. What if fate had thrown me a curveball? And what if Ruth had been a Kikuyu or a Luya or a Luo or a Kalenjin or you name it? Yeah. What would people have said about that? Can you imagine?
PNU, ODM.
Yeah. So I lucked out, didn't I? Who can come on?
What's that famous line? You simply cannot make
this stuff up. You bet.
All right, Ambassador.
You can.
Before I let you all go, this happy couple, final thoughts.
Yeah.
Final thoughts about your 5 years stay in Kenya.
Well, the 5-year stay, honestly, it's been a wonderful experience. And I say that advisedly. I know there have been some terrible times for Kenya, the crisis, but there have also been some good times, the Constitution. And I do believe that you have to seize opportunity from crisis. And I'm pleased that we were able to help the Kenyan people seize that opportunity to develop the coalition government, but most importantly, to develop the reform agenda that then led to passage of the Constitution. What I've done on youth empowerment. So I look back on the 5 years, and I'm thinking, what a great experience I've had personally, and part of it's personal, obviously, and doesn't hurt that I met her, but part of it's also, and again, I hope people take this right, I have fun doing my job. I mean, I enjoy it. People think, they think I sort of lay awake at night thinking about, oh God, what are we going to do? I know I sleep like a baby, because you've got to sort of compartmentalize these things. I loved it when the parliamentarians were threatening to censure me. Jeff, it was great. Well, I ran into one of them, and he was sort of smirking afterwards. He said, I bet you were really concerned about that. You're watching the count, and I said, hell, I was out Christmas shopping. I wasn't even watching it. It's utter nonsense, So, I mean, you got to have perspective about this stuff. So I've had fun. It's been a challenge in many, many ways. And to sum it all up, I feel that if I've made some small contribution to the country, and obviously at the same time, that's a contribution to my government, because our interests are almost inseparable when it comes to issues like reform. So I feel like I've advanced the interest of my government. I've brought the American and Kenyan people even closer together, and I feel like we've made a contribution to trying to move the reform and change process ahead in Kenya to make it more democratically stable and prosperous in the future. And if I leave that as my legacy, then obviously I'm happy.
Yeah, a legacy which you will have to come back to be a part of.
Absolutely. Not going to say when. This is, Jeff, this is like a soap opera, you see, to be continued.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Ambassador, congratulations.
Thank you.
And well done, man.
Thanks.
It's great being having you, and thanks
a
for
lot.
inviting us to all these functions over the years, man.
It's been great being on the bench. I don't know how many times, I've lost count, but a lot of times.
Just smoking.
It's smoking.
Ruth, good luck. So is it going to be Ruth RANNEBARGER? It's double R.
Yeah, RR.
Ruth RANNEBARGER. Ruth and Michael RANNEBARGER. I'm going to start a rumor.
Has a ring to
it. It does have a ring to it. Oh, Ambassador, great. What a show. What a guest. Oh, what a week it's going to be, folks. It's all about diplomats, and beginning with a man who's just completed his 5-year term, and he's the longest serving U.S. ambassador. Michael RANNEBARGER in the house, his house in Muthaiga. Wow. You simply cannot make this stuff up. And it's only Monday. Tune in, folks, tomorrow in the People paper, newspaper. Pick it up. More of this interview with Michael RANNEBARGER. It's hot. It's exclusive. It's a keeper. Do that. Go out there, pick a paper, tell a friend. I tell you, folks, what a show. You cannot find the ambassador anywhere else. He's out of town. He'll end up in Kilgoris with Ruth. Right here on the bench on the award-winning station, K24, where we are, even in times of the RANNEBARGERs.
All Kenyan.
All the time.
Good, well done.
Man, good job. Good job. Both
Thank
of
you,
you.
Jeff.
You know,
Fantastic.
she's scary. She almost outshines me with the media. I mean, God,